When I turned the corner and saw my suitcase sitting on the doorstep like a forgotten thought, I knew my life had quietly split into a before and an after. It was still early, one of those mornings where the sky hasn't decided what color it wants to be yet. Gray, mostly. The kind of gray that settles into your bones. My shoes scraped against the pavement as I walked up the short path to my daughter's house, the house I had helped her buy, the house where I'd folded tiny onesies and rocked her bobbies to sleep when she said she was too tired. And there it was, my old brown suitcase. The zipper half open, one sock hanging out like it was waving goodbye. For a moment, I thought maybe she was playing some kind of joke. My daughter had a strange sense of humor when she was nervous, but then I tried the door. The key didn't turn. I tried again, slower this time, like gentleness might persuade the lock to remember me. Nothing. Just that hollow click, final, indifferent. I stood there longer than I should have, my hand still on the knob, feeling foolish. And that's when I noticed the car across the street, parked too neatly, engine running. A man inside, hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead but aware of everything. I recognized him right away. The bank manager. He didn't look at me, not directly, but I could feel his presence like a second judgment layered over the first. I picked up the suitcase. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe my arms were just tired in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. I tell you this now not to shock you, but to ask you to listen closely. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about family, about quiet betrayals and slow truths, subscribe to my channel and stay with me. Because this didn't begin on that doorstep. It began years earlier, in a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and toast, with a daughter who used to call me every day. Before all of this, my life was ordinary in the best way. I'm a bank teller by training, though I retired early after my husband passed. Harold had been gone 5 years by the time this happened. Heart attack on a Tuesday. No warning, no drama, just gone. After that, my days became smaller but steadier. Morning walks, crossword puzzles, a weekly lunch with my friend Maureen where we complained about our knees and pretended not to count pennies. My daughter Elaine lived 15 minutes away. She used to say she liked knowing I was close, that it made her feel safe. She had 2 children, my grandchildren, who filled her house with noise and crumbs and the sweet chaos of young life. I helped where I could, school pickups, doctor appointments. Emergency babysitting when her husband, Mark, worked late or when she needed just one night to breathe. I didn't mind. I loved being needed. Elaine had always been practical, organized, the kind of woman who labeled pantry shelves and kept a shared calendar on the fridge. She worked in real estate, had a sharp eye for numbers, and a smile she used carefully. We got along well enough, though after Harold died, something shifted. She became efficient with me, loving, yes, but brisk. As if grief were a task she didn't quite have time to linger over. Still, I trusted her. That trust was built over decades, over scraped knees and science fair projects, over late-night talks after her first heartbreak when she cried into my sweater and said she never wanted to end up alone. I promised her she wouldn't. The house she lived in now was one I'd helped finance. Not outright, just a bridge loan when the market was tight. "I'll pay you back," she said, waving a hand. "It's just temporary." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. Sometimes, when things felt too quiet at my place, I stayed over. Slept in the guest room with the floral curtains. Watched cartoons with the kids on Saturday mornings. Elaine said it was good for them to have me around. Good for her, too. That's what made the first change so easy to miss. It was little things at first. A pause before answering my calls, a new tightness around her eyes when I mentioned money. Once, I noticed the filing cabinet in her study was locked. That was new. She laughed it off when I asked. "Mark's idea," she said, "just being careful." I told myself not to be sensitive. Widows can be needy without meaning to. That's what Maureen said when I mentioned it over soup. "Give her space," she advised. "Kids grow up, even when they're adults." So I did. I gave space. I stopped dropping by unannounced. I waited to be invited. The invitations came less often. The night before everything fell apart, I stayed over because Elaine had asked me to watch the kids while she and Mark attended a dinner with some people from the bank. She said it casually, but my ears caught it. Bank people were important to her lately. She'd mentioned refinancing, consolidating, using the house's equity for something strategic. When she came home, she smelled like wine and expensive perfume, not hers. She was flushed, talking too fast. I asked how it went. She said fine, just fine. I went to bed uneasy, though I couldn't say why. In the morning, I woke early and made pancakes for the kids. The house was quiet, too quiet. Elaine's bedroom door was closed. Her car was gone. I didn't think much of it then. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from her. Just one line. "We need to talk, not today." I stared at that message for a long time, the words floating like something unfinished. I packed my overnight bag slowly, folded my nightgown, left the pancakes uneaten in the fridge. I didn't know that by the next morning, I wouldn't be welcome back inside. And I didn't know that a man from the bank would be sitting across the street, watching my life be boxed up and set outside like it no longer belonged to me. Not yet. I didn't go back to my apartment right away after leaving Elaine's house that morning. Instead, I drove without much direction, letting the familiar streets blur together until I ended up in the grocery store parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off. The steering wheel felt cold under my palms. I remember staring at a crack in the windshield I'd been meaning to fix for years, tracing it with my eyes like it might explain something. "We need to talk, not today." Those words kept circling my mind, landing heavier each time. Elaine wasn't the kind of person who postponed conversations unless she was arranging them carefully. She liked control, always had. Even as a child, she planned her apologies before delivering them. That text wasn't hesitation, it was preparation. I went home eventually, carrying a restlessness I couldn't shake. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the air stale. I unpacked my overnight bag, noticing that my hands were trembling just slightly. Not enough to drop anything, just enough to be aware of it. That afternoon, I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. I left a message I regret now, too soft, too apologetic. "Honey, I'm sure whatever this is, we can talk it through. Call me when you're ready." I even added a small laugh at the end, like this was just another scheduling mix-up. She didn't call. The next day passed slowly. I watered my plants, folded laundry that didn't need folding, turned the television on and off without absorbing a thing. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren outside, felt louder, sharper. I kept checking my phone, then chastising myself for it. By the second evening, worry settled into something darker. I called Mark. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted. "Hey," he said, like we were coworkers passing in a hallway. "Is Elaine all right?" I asked. "She hasn't returned my calls." There was a pause, not long but telling. "She's busy," he said finally. "You know how she gets." I did know how she got. That wasn't it. "Busy with what?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I shouldn't be in the middle of this. You'll hear from her." Before I could respond, he hung up. That was when the first real fear took hold. Not panic, something colder. The kind of fear that doesn't rush but settles, like dust. The following morning, I decided to stop waiting. I drove to Elaine's house just after 9, rehearsing calm explanations in my head. Maybe she was embarrassed about money. Maybe she'd made a mistake and didn't know how to tell me. I told myself I'd be understanding. I always had been. That's when I found the suitcase. And the lock that no longer recognized me. Standing there on the porch, suitcase in hand, I noticed the small things my eyes had skipped over at first. The door frame had fresh scratches near the lock. The welcome mat, the one with the faded sunflowers, had been replaced. Even the porch light was different. Brighter, whiter, as if the house had been scrubbed of me overnight. I knocked. Once, twice. No answer. Across the street, the bank manager's car idled. I knew his name, Mr. Kessler. Tall man, always wore gray suits and spoke in careful phrases. He'd approved Elaine's last refinancing application. I remembered sitting beside her in his office months earlier, nodding along while she explained our family arrangement. He'd smiled at me then, respectfully, or so I thought. Now he stared straight ahead, pretending not to see me. I lifted my phone and dialed Elaine again, my fingers stiff. This time, she answered. "What?" she said, no greeting, no warmth. "I'm at your house," I said. "My key doesn't work." Silence crackled on the line. "I changed the locks," she said finally. My throat tightened. "Why?" "You weren't supposed to come today." "I live 15 minutes away," I said. "I don't need an appointment to see my daughter." She sighed, sharp and impatient. "This is exactly why we needed boundaries." "Boundaries," I echoed. "Elaine, my suitcase is on your porch." "Yes," she said. "I packed it for you. I thought that would be easier." Easier? I looked down at the suitcase again. At the scuffed corners, the familiar weight. "You thought wrong." Her voice softened just a fraction. Not with regret, with resolve. "Mom, this isn't up for discussion. You've been staying too often. The kids need stability." "I am stability," I said. The word surprised even me. She ignored that. "You'll get your things. We'll talk later, just not here." "Are you selling the house?" I asked suddenly. I don't know where it came from. Maybe the car, maybe the silence. Another pause, then, "That's none of your business." "It used to be." Before I could say anything else, she hung up. I stood there for a long time after that. Long enough for the engine across the street to turn off. Long enough for Mr. Kessler to finally step out of his car. "Mrs. Harris," he said, walking toward me with careful steps, like approaching a skittish animal. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this." I laughed then, a short, brittle sound. "Are you?" He adjusted his tie. "I'm here to ensure everything proceeds smoothly." "Smoothly for whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. I loaded the suitcase into my car myself. No one offered help. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, already on his phone. That night, I opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes, yes, but also things I hadn't packed, old letters, tax documents, a folder labeled property. My name was on some of it, crossed out on others. That was when I understood. This wasn't about boundaries. This was about erasing me. And whatever Elaine had done, she hadn't done it alone. I sat on my bed, papers spread around me like evidence, and for the first time since Harold died, I felt something harden inside my chest. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. But I was going to find out the truth. That night, sleep avoided me like I'd offended it. I lay in bed with the lamp on low, the suitcase open at my feet, papers spread across the quilt in uneven stacks. Every document felt heavier than the last, as if each page carried not just ink but intention. Elaine hadn't tossed these in by accident. This was a message, or a mistake she hadn't noticed yet. The folder labeled property was thick, too thick. I put on my reading glasses and began slowly, the way you do when you're afraid of what you might understand if you go too fast. There were copies of loan agreements, refinancing forms, appraisals. Most of it was familiar in shape but not in substance. Addresses I recognized, numbers that made my stomach dip. And there, halfway through, was a document with my name typed neatly across the top. Guarantor. My fingers paused on the page. I had co-signed once. Just once. Years earlier, when Elaine and Mark were still in their starter home and the market had been unforgiving. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, Harold's pen in my hand, Elaine packing behind me, promising me it was temporary, that they just needed a little help to get over the hump. This wasn't that. This was recent. The date was less than 6 months old. And I hadn't signed it. I flipped through the pages faster now, breath shallow. There were signatures, Elaine's, Mark's, and a third name where mine should have been. Similar, but not mine. The curve of the letters was wrong, too sharp, too deliberate. Forgery is a strange word. You don't expect to encounter it in your own family. I set the papers down and pressed my palms to my knees, grounding myself. The apartment was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. I counted the seconds between each sound, trying to slow my thoughts. It wasn't just one document. There were 3, all with the same falsified signature, all tied to loans secured against the house. My house, too, in a way, or it had been. A memory surfaced then, Mr. Kessler's office, the way he'd slid papers across the desk, his pen hovering just a moment too long before handing it to Elaine instead of me. I'd assumed it was courtesy, or respect. I understood now what it had really been. By morning, I had made a decision. I showered, dressed carefully, and gathered the papers back into the folder. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked older than I remembered, but steadier, too. Grief had hollowed me once. This was different. This was a sharpening. I didn't call Elaine. I went to the bank. The building was cool and smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. Familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I'd worked in places like this most of my life. I knew the rhythm of it, the polite smiles, the quiet urgency beneath. When I asked for Mr. Kessler, the receptionist's smile tightened. "He's in a meeting," she said. "I'll wait," I replied, already moving toward the chairs near his office. It took 27 minutes. When he finally stepped out and saw me, his expression flickered. Not surprise, calculation. "Mrs. Harris," he said, "this is unexpected." "I imagine it is," I said, standing. "We need to talk." He hesitated, then gestured me inside. His office looked the same as before. Neutral colors, diplomas on the wall, a framed photo of a sailboat that suggested leisure without revealing much. He closed the door behind us. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it to the first forged document. "You approved this loan," I said. "Yes," he replied smoothly, "with all the proper signatures." I slid the paper closer to him. "That isn't my signature." He didn't look at it right away. Instead, he folded his hands. "Mrs. Harris, family arrangements can be complex." "That's a legal document," I said, "not a family recipe." He sighed then, the sound practiced. "Elaine assured us she had your consent." "Did she assure you she had my handwriting, too?" That made him glance down, just briefly, but it was enough. "You're aware," I continued, "that forging a guarantor's signature is a felony." Silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he said, "If you'd like to file a formal complaint." "I would like to know," I interrupted, "why you watched me stand on my daughter's porch yesterday while my belongings were placed outside like trash." His jaw tightened. "That was not my intention." "But you were there." "Yes," he admitted. "Elaine requested my presence. She said things might become emotional." I almost laughed again, but this time it didn't break me. "You mean she wanted a witness?" "She wanted protection," he said, "for herself." "From what?" I asked. "Her own mother." He didn't answer that. I closed the folder. "You have a choice," I said quietly. "You can help me untangle this, or you can explain to the authorities why you ignored obvious discrepancies in a loan involving a forged signature." He leaned back in his chair, studying me anew. "You're serious?" "I've never been more so." Another long pause, then, "Give me a day." "I'll give you 12 hours, I said. "After that, I make calls." I left the bank feeling both lighter and heavier. The sun outside was too bright, the world continuing on as if nothing had cracked open. But something had shifted. A line crossed. That afternoon, Elaine called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was strained, tight around the edges. "Mom, you went to the bank. You're making this worse than it needs to be." I didn't respond. An hour later, Mark texted, "Please, we can talk. This doesn't have to get ugly." I stared at the words, then set the phone down. It already was ugly. They just hadn't wanted me to see it. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, the phone rang again. This time, it was Mr. Kessler. "Mrs. Harris," he said, his tone altered, less confident now. "There are some irregularities we need to address. Elaine will be contacting you." I closed my eyes. The truth was coming to the surface, slowly, reluctantly. And when it did, it wouldn't belong to just us anymore. Elaine didn't contact me right away, despite what Mr. Kessler had said. That was like her, delaying until she could decide which version of herself to present. The apologetic daughter, the efficient professional, or the wounded one who turned every confrontation into an accusation. I knew her rhythms. I taught them to her without meaning to. That night, I slept for the first time in days. Not well, but deeply. The kind of sleep where your body shuts down before your mind can argue. When I woke, the sky outside my window was pale blue, and for a brief, foolish second, I thought maybe I'd imagined everything. Then I saw the folder on the table. By mid-morning, the call came. "Can we meet?" Elaine asked. Her voice was careful, now measured. "In person." "Where?" I asked. "Not the house," she said quickly. "Somewhere neutral." I almost smiled. Neutral, as if we were negotiating strangers. "Fine," I said. "The cafe on Maple." We used to go there together when she was younger, after school conferences or doctor visits. It smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso, and the chairs were always slightly uncomfortable. A place designed for conversation, not comfort. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting stiffly with her hands wrapped around a paper cup she hadn't touched. She looked tired, older. There were faint lines around her mouth I didn't remember noticing before. For a moment, I saw my daughter again. Not the woman who changed the locks, but the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then she spoke. "You went to the bank," she said. "Yes." "You threatened them." I told them the truth. Her jaw tightened. "You could have come to me." "I tried," I said. "You locked me out." That landed, not hard but enough. She looked down at the table, then back up. I didn't know how else to do it. "Do what?" I asked. "Use my name without my permission. Erase me from your life." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Elaine rarely did. "You don't understand the pressure we were under." "Then help me," I said. "Understand." She took a breath, long and slow, as if bracing herself. "Mark lost money," she said. "Bad investment. He didn't tell me at first. By the time I found out, it was already serious." "How serious?" She hesitated, enough that we were close to losing the house. The words hung between us. "And you thought," I said slowly, "that risking my financial future without asking was better than asking for help." "I knew you'd say no," she replied too quickly. "That's not true." "You'd hesitate," she corrected. "You'd ask questions, you'd want control." I studied her then, really studied her. "And what did you want, Elaine?" She swallowed. "Stability." "At my expense." She flinched. It wasn't supposed to go this far. "It always does," I said quietly, "when you lie." She looked away, out the cafe window where people passed by unaware. "The bank needed a guarantor, someone with assets," Mr. Kessler said. "What exactly did he say?" I asked. "That if I had authorization, it could be handled quickly." "And you took that to mean you could fake my signature." She closed her eyes. "I thought I could fix it before you ever knew." I felt something crack then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change the shape of things inside me. "You didn't just betray my trust," I said. "You risked my home, my savings, everything your father and I built." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I raised you to be careful with people's lives," I continued, "not just your own." Tears finally slipped free, tracing quiet lines down her cheeks. She brushed them away angrily. "I was scared." "I know," I said, "but fear doesn't excuse theft." That word, theft, made her stiffen. "This could ruin us," she said, "if you take this further." "I didn't start it," I replied, "but I will finish it honestly." She stared at me then, really stared, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as her mother, not as a safety net, but as a person capable of drawing a line. "What do you want?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I sipped my coffee, now lukewarm, and considered the question carefully. "I want the loans corrected," I said. "My name removed, legally. I want a written acknowledgement that my signature was forged. And I want you to understand that I won't lie to protect you from the consequences." Her shoulders sagged. Mark will lose everything. Then Mark should have thought about that before he gambled with money that wasn't his. She nodded slowly, as if absorbing a truth she'd avoided for too long. "And the kids?" she asked softly. I felt that one, deeply. "The kids need parents who model responsibility," I said, "not shortcuts." She wiped her face with a napkin, breathing unevenly. "You're really going to do this?" "Yes," I said. "And Elaine, listen to me carefully. I love you. That hasn't changed. But love doesn't mean silence." We sat there a while longer, not talking. When she finally stood, she looked smaller somehow. "I'll talk to the bank," she said. "I'll fix it." "You'll cooperate," I corrected. "The bank will fix it." She nodded. As she walked out, I noticed people watching us, not with curiosity but recognition. They'd seen this before. Families unraveling quietly over coffee. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mr. Kessler confirming a meeting with legal counsel present. The situation was no longer private. And once things leave the family, they don't come back the same. The meeting with the bank was scheduled for the following morning, and I barely slept the night before. Not from fear this time, but from the strange weight of inevitability. Some things, once spoken aloud, can't be folded back into silence. I lay awake listening to the hum of the heater, thinking about how many nights I'd spent soothing Elaine's fears when she was little. Monsters under the bed, tests she hadn't studied enough for, futures she was sure she'd ruin. I wondered when she'd stopped coming to me first. The bank's conference room was on the third floor, all glass and polished wood. Too bright, too clean. Mr. Kessler sat at one end of the table, flanked by a woman in a navy suit who introduced herself as the bank's legal counsel. Elaine and Mark arrived together, but they didn't sit close. There was a space between them that hadn't been there before. Mark looked worse than Elaine. Pale, drawn, his eyes darted around the room like he was looking for exits. No one offered coffee. The lawyer began, her voice steady and neutral. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for coming. We're here to address discrepancies in recent loan documents tied to the Maple Street property." Discrepancies, such a gentle word. She slid copies of the documents across the table. The forged signatures were highlighted in yellow. "We've confirmed," she continued, "that the guarantor signatures attributed to you are not authentic." Elaine's hands clenched in her lap. Mark stared at the table. Mr. Kessler cleared his throat. "The bank takes full responsibility for failing to verify authorization adequately." I noted the phrasing, responsibility without admission. "And what does that mean for me?" I asked. The lawyer met my eyes. "It means your name will be removed from all related obligations effective immediately. The loans will be restructured solely under Elaine and Mark's liability." "And the forged documents?" I pressed. There was a brief pause. "They will be voided." "Not destroyed, not reported, voided." "And the legal consequences?" I asked calmly. Elaine's head snapped up. "Mom." I raised a hand without looking at her. "I'm asking." The lawyer folded her hands. "Given your willingness to resolve this internally, the bank is prepared to avoid pursuing criminal charges." I understood then. This wasn't just about protecting Elaine. It was about protecting themselves. "So," I said, "if I stay quiet, everyone walks away bruised but intact." Mr. Kessler shifted uncomfortably. "And if I do?" I asked. The lawyer didn't answer directly. That would complicate matters. For whom, I wondered. I leaned back in my chair, feeling an unexpected calm settle over me. This was the moment, not the porch, not the suitcase. This. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said, "but I am interested in accountability." Elaine's eyes filled again. Mark finally spoke. "I messed up," he said hoarsely. "I know that, but if this goes public, if charges are filed, I won't be able to work in my field again." I looked at him then, really looked. I saw fear, yes, but also something else, a habit of risk without consequence. "You should have thought about that," I said, not cruelly, just truthfully. Elaine reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "I won't file a criminal complaint," I said finally. Elaine exhaled sharply, on one condition. Everyone leaned in. "That the bank issues a formal written acknowledgement of the forgery," I continued, "and that Elaine and Mark attend financial counseling as part of the loan restructuring." Elaine frowned. "That's not necessary." "It is," I said, "if you want my silence." The lawyer nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." "And one more thing," I added. "I want my personal belongings returned, all of them, not filtered, not selected." Elaine's face flushed. "Of course." The meeting ended shortly after that. Papers were signed. Dates were set. As we stood to leave, Mr. Kessler stopped me near the door. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you handled this with grace." I met his gaze. Grace is what you call it when someone refuses to burn the house down, even after you tried to lock them out of it. He didn't respond. Outside, Elaine followed me to my car. The parking lot was busy, people coming and going with their own invisible burdens. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I know," I replied, "but intention doesn't erase impact." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Are you going to forgive me?" I opened my car door, then paused. "Forgiveness isn't a moment," I said. "It's a process, and it starts with honesty." She wiped her face. "Can we start over?" I looked at her, at the woman she'd become. "We can start again," I said, "but not from where we left off." That weekend, I returned to her house, with notice. She handed me boxes of my things without meeting my eyes. The children hugged me tightly, confused but warm, their small arms reminding me of what was still worth protecting. As I drove away, my trunk full, I felt lighter than I had in months. But I also knew this story wasn't finished. Because when private truths brush against public systems, echoes follow. And soon, others would start asking questions. The questions didn't come all at once. They never do. They arrive the way cracks spread in glass, quietly at first, then all you see. The first call came from Maureen. "I ran into someone from your daughter's neighborhood," she said, her voice lowered like we were sharing gossip over a fence. "She mentioned seeing boxes on the porch, asked if everything was all right." I closed my eyes. People notice more than we think. "They do," Maureen agreed gently. "Do you want me to tell them anything?" "No," I said after a moment. "Let silence do what it does." But silence, I was learning, has a way of inviting speculation. Within a week, Elaine's name came up in conversations at the grocery store, at church, at the dry cleaner. Not directly, just sideways. Someone mentioned refinancing gone wrong. Someone else asked if I was still helping Elaine with things. Even the librarian tilted her head when she asked how my grandchildren were doing, like she was bracing for an answer she already suspected. Elaine called me less. When she did, it was clipped, practical, updates about the kids, logistics, nothing tender. Mark didn't call at all. I spent my days reorganizing my apartment, deciding what to keep and what to give away. There was something cathartic about it, choosing deliberately instead of accumulating by habit. I donated old clothes, threw out mismatched dishes, reframed a photo of Harold and me on our wedding day, placing it by the window where the afternoon light softened his smile. At night, I thought about the house, about the porch, about how easily I'd been removed from a place I thought was partly mine. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill. The return address was the bank. Inside was the formal acknowledgement I'd requested, carefully worded, stamped, signed. It confirmed the forgery, the corrective actions taken, the restructuring completed. But there was an addendum. Due to internal review, the bank has placed Mr. Kessler on administrative leave pending further investigation. I read that line twice. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet, solemn recognition that actions ripple outward whether we want them to or not. That evening, Elaine showed up at my door unannounced. She looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. When I opened the door, she hesitated, as if unsure she still belonged on the other side of it. "I heard," she said, "about Mr. Kessler." "Yes," I replied. She stepped inside, standing awkwardly until I gestured toward the couch. She didn't sit, just paced. "They're asking questions at work," she said. "Clients, colleagues, someone leaked something." I folded my arms. That wasn't me. "I know," she said quickly. This is getting bigger than I expected." I studied her. "What did you expect, Elaine?" She stopped packing. "I thought we could contain it." There it was again. Containment, control. "This was never just between us," I said. "You involved institutions, paperwork, other people's livelihoods." She sank onto the couch then, her shoulders slumping. "Mark might lose his job." I felt a familiar ache, maternal instinct tugging at me despite everything. "Is he looking for work elsewhere?" She shook her head. "He's angry, says this is all your fault." I let that sit. "Does he?" I asked finally. She didn't answer. I sat across from her, the space between us careful but not hostile. "Elaine," I said softly, "you don't have to defend him to me, but you do need to be honest with yourself." She covered her face with her hands. "I don't know how we got here." "I do," I said. "You stopped asking for help and started taking it." Her shoulders trembled just slightly. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends," I replied, "on what you choose to learn from this." She looked up, eyes red. "And us." I thought of the porch, the lock, the suitcase. "We're rebuilding," I said, "but rebuilding takes time and patience and truth." She nodded, wiping her face. "I want that." "Then start by telling your children the truth," I said. "Not everything, but enough that they know mistakes were made and that accountability matters." She looked startled. "They're too young." "They're not too young to learn integrity," I said gently. She stayed a while longer, helping me wash dishes in silence. When she left, she hugged me carefully, like she was afraid I might break. I didn't. Weeks passed. The noise died down. Mr. Kessler resigned. Elaine's reputation took a quiet hit, nothing dramatic, just a loss of trust that lingered in small ways. Mark eventually took a lower-paying job in another firm. The house wasn't sold. But something else was. The illusion that family loyalty excuses everything. One afternoon, as I sat by my window watching leaves fall, I realized something had shifted inside me. Not bitterness, not resentment. Strength. I had survived being locked out, literally and figuratively. I had chosen dignity over destruction, and in doing so, I had reclaimed something essential. My voice. Autumn settled in quietly that year, like it didn't want to draw attention to itself. The trees outside my apartment window shifted from green to gold almost overnight, leaves tapping softly against the glass when the wind picked up. I found comfort in the rhythm of the season, things falling, yes, but also making room for what comes next. Elaine began calling more regularly. Not every day, not with urgency, just enough to remind me she was trying. Sometimes she'd ask about recipes, sometimes about the kids' school projects. Once, she called just to tell me she'd driven past the cafe on Maple and thought of me. Those were the moments I held on to. Small, unpolished, real. We didn't talk about the house anymore, or the loans, or the lock, not because they were forgotten, but because we both knew where they stood, like furniture that had been rearranged but not removed. One Saturday morning, she asked if I would come to the children's school play. "I understand if you don't want to," she added quickly. "I just thought I'd ask." "I'll come," I said. The auditorium smelled like dust and glue sticks. Parents shuffled in folding chairs, cameras raised too high, whispering loudly. When my granddaughter spotted me in the third row, her face lit up like I'd hung the moon just for her. She waved so hard the teacher had to gently lower her arm. Elaine sat 2 rows ahead of me. She didn't turn around, but I could see her shoulders relax when she knew I was there. After the play, the kids ran to me first. Their arms wrapped around my waist, sticky with juice and pride. Did you see me? My grandson asked. I didn't miss a second, I said. Elaine approached more slowly, smiling in that careful way she did now. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, I replied. We stood there, the four of us, a picture that from the outside looked whole again. But wholeness, I was learning, doesn't mean untouched. It means repaired. Later that afternoon, Elaine asked if I wanted to come back to the house for dinner. I paused. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to choose, not react. Yes, I said finally, I'd like that. The door opened easily this time. No hesitation, no resistance. The new lock clicked softly, not defiantly. I noticed she hadn't changed the welcome mat again. The sunflowers were gone, but the space where they'd been remained. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. Familiar, comforting. Elaine moved through the kitchen with nervous energy, over-explaining everything. I know it's not your recipe, she said, but I tried. That's enough, I said. During dinner, Mark was quiet, polite. He avoided my eyes, focusing on the children instead. I didn't push. Accountability doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like restraint. After the kids were in bed, Elaine walked me to the door. I know things will never be the same, she said. No, I agreed, but they don't have to be broken. She nodded, tears welling but not spilling. I'm glad you didn't give up on me. I didn't, I said. I just stopped sacrificing myself. That distinction mattered. Driving home, I felt something close to peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of clarity. I'd learned where my edges were, and I'd honored them. Weeks later, Maureen asked me over lunch if I regretted not pressing charges. No, I said after thinking it through, because my goal wasn't punishment, it was truth. And did you get it? Yes, I said, at a cost, but yes. That winter, I volunteered at a financial literacy workshop for seniors, helped them read fine print, taught them how to ask the questions they were often too polite to voice. It felt like turning my experience into something useful, protective. One woman pulled me aside after a session, her voice shaking. My son wants me to co-sign something, she said. I didn't know how to say no. I took her hands in mine. Saying no doesn't mean you don't love him, I said. It means you love yourself too. She nodded, tears spilling freely. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how easily love can be confused with obligation. How often we give more than we should, thinking it will secure our place in someone's life. But love that demands your silence isn't love. It's leverage. And I had finally let go of being leveraged. By the time spring arrived, the sharpness of everything had softened. Not disappeared, just dulled enough that I could breathe around it. The days grew longer, light stretching into the evenings, catching dust motes in my living room and turning them into something almost beautiful. I began taking my morning walks again, not because I was trying to return to who I used to be, but because I was curious about who I was becoming. Elaine and I settled into a new rhythm, not the old one where she leaned and I steadied. This one was more deliberate, balanced. She called before coming over now, always, and when she asked for help, she didn't assume. I noticed it in the way she phrased things. Could you watch the kids if you're free? Would you be willing to look over this with me? Small changes, but real ones. Mark kept his distance, not rudely, just carefully. When we were in the same room, he was respectful, quiet, almost deferential. I could tell he carried resentment. Wounded pride has a way of clinging, but I could also tell he'd learned something. Losing ground will do that to a person. One afternoon, Elaine asked if I would meet her at the bank. Just to close the loop, she said, so everything's clean. I agreed. Walking back into that building stirred something in me, but not fear. Awareness. The new manager greeted us politely, eyes a little too attentive, like she'd read the file and knew exactly who I was. The paperwork was straightforward this time, transparent. My name appeared nowhere it didn't belong. When it was done, Elaine exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Thank you, she said quietly as we left. For what? I asked. For not letting me pretend this away, she replied. That might have been the closest she'd come to an apology that didn't protect her ego. I accepted it for what it was. A few weeks later, she invited me to lunch, just the two of us. No children, no distractions. We sat at a small bistro with chipped tables and fresh bread that arrived warm and steaming. For a while, we talked about nothing important. A show she was watching, a book I'd just finished, ordinary things. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. I was afraid, she said suddenly. I know, I replied. Not just of losing the house, she continued. Of losing the life I'd built, and of realizing I couldn't fix everything on my own. I held her gaze. You were never meant to. She nodded, eyes shining. I think I forgot you were a person, not just my mother. The honesty in that stung, but it also healed. I let you forget, I said gently. I confused being loving with being endlessly available. She squeezed my hand. I don't want to do that again. Neither do I said. That was the moment I felt something finally settle into place. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The kind that doesn't excuse, but explains. Later that summer, Elaine gave me a spare key to the house. You don't have to use it, she said quickly. I want you to have it. I turned it over in my palm, the metal cool and solid. I'll keep it, I said, but I'll still knock. She smiled, relieved. The grandchildren grew, as children do, fast and without asking permission. They stopped waving frantically and started rolling their eyes affectionately when I hugged them too long. Progress. One evening, my granddaughter asked, Grandma, why didn't you live with us anymore? Elaine froze. I could see the panic rise in her chest. I knelt down to my granddaughter's level. Because sometimes grown-ups need their own space, I said, even when they love each other. She considered that, like when I get mad at my brother. Exactly like that, I smiled. That night, Elaine hugged me longer than usual. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't ask for what. As for me, my life felt fuller in a quieter way. I hosted Sunday dinners with friends, took a class I'd been putting off for years, learned how to say no without apology and yes without guilt. The memory of the suitcase on the porch never left me, but it no longer haunted me. It reminded me that love without boundaries can become a burden. That silence can enable harm. That dignity is something you practice, not something you're granted. I had walked away from that doorstep, humiliated and confused. I had returned to myself stronger, clearer, and unafraid to be seen. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance I'd given my daughter. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the light fades just right, I still think about that morning on the porch. About how quickly love can be packed into a suitcase if no one is guarding it. About how easily we confuse loyalty with silence and sacrifice with virtue. I want to tell you something I didn't understand back then, standing there with my key in my hand and a lock that no longer knew me. Being a parent doesn't mean you surrender your personhood. Being family doesn't mean you accept erasure. And loving someone deeply does not require you to disappear so they can feel safe. For a long time, I believed my job was to absorb pain, fear, responsibility, so my child wouldn't have to. I wore that belief like a badge of honor. But what I learned the hard way is that love without boundaries doesn't protect anyone. It distorts. It teaches the wrong lessons. It quietly trains people to cross lines they should never approach. When I finally spoke up, I wasn't choosing myself over my daughter. I was choosing honesty for both of us. That choice cost me comfort. It cost me the illusion of harmony. But it gave me something far more valuable: self-respect, clarity, and a relationship rebuilt on truth instead of obligation. If you're listening to this and you're standing on your own version of that porch, confused, hurt, wondering if you're being too much or too sensitive, let me tell you what no one told me soon enough. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect what you've built, even from the people you love most. And sometimes, the bravest thing a heart can do is refuse to stay silent. Would you have spoken up if you were in my place? Or would you have picked up the suitcase and swallowed the truth? If stories like this speak to you, stories about family, boundaries, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel, stay with me, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their voice too.